Hey Creagears, Roboy here, and welcome back to the second part in our Splatfest Float Diorama. It's time to upgrade the floats from their combined Day 1 version to their full Day 2 version. And this time, let's make the electronics with an adapter instead of the batteries that we would usually do for our dioramas. That way, if a Splatoon event in Europe would ever like to showcase this, hint hint, it can be presented all day instead of requiring a change of batteries like every 2 hours. Since we have a lot of things to assemble, a lot of things to paint, and a lot of soldering to do, we better get started. A good place to start with this diorama is going to be the frame of the stage. For these, I'd made this as a 2D drawing so that I could laser cut the pieces from some 6mm plywood. I would have liked to have these made with some acrylic sheets to save some effort on the wood grain, but luckily it was nothing that a little bit of sanding, a coat of acrylic on top, and some thick spray paint couldn't fix. Thank God for Black Montana, I guess. Now all I needed to do was to glue the 3 pieces together for the front and the back, and then add the little 40mm strips of plywood in between the girders. With this method, technically more people could also try their hand at making their Splatfest floats into the Day 2 version. They have a laser cutter for the plywood and some of the acrylics. But if you see how much other stuff is also required for this fun, I would not suggest making this as much as I did for the Day 1 version. So for now, let us just show you how we made this by now supergluing the frame to the 40 by 50 cm MDF platform that I made to house everything. These girders then get finished with a wrap of a 3 cm wide piece of craft paper to make for the points where the real deal would have been made into different segments. With the girders complete, I then wanted to tackle the MDF platform by adding this mix of Mod Podge and baking soda to the platform. Then I tried to divide this mix equally over the platform while making sure that the glue does not start to harden yet. Since once I have all of this covered, I then go over the mix with another layer of baking soda to create this uneven asphalt-like texture for the platform. And do make sure that if you use the same technique you wear a respirator, because the baking soda powder can be really fine, so it gets caught up in the air really quickly. While that dries, I can start to work on the first of the details of this diorama, starting with the firecrackers. For these, I'd cut a whole bunch of these 6mm wide wooden dowels to a length of about 15mm. These I then placed onto this little holder that I made to be able to spray paint them with a coat of dark red all over. Once these are dry, I'd also prepared these lengths of black aluminium wire. When we glue these into the 1mm holes that I'd pre-drilled into their tops, these will then make for the fuses of the firecrackers. And by using this little puddle of super glue, I also save a lot of time that would otherwise be wasted on applying the glue to each individual fuse. Now, I can just dip them into the puddle and then insert them into the top. because this then gets repeated about 80 times. And then these 80 firecrackers then get sorted into their respective lengths of 10 cm, 8 cm and 5 cm fuses. Then these get equally divided over 7 portions. And then, starting from the longest length of wire, I twist about 12 of these together. While also trying my best to make sure that the group is more spread out towards the top. Once done, we are left with these 7 packs of firecrackers. Next up are the spotlights. For these I discovered that a 19mm PVC pipe fits very nicely over a 16mm dowel. For both of these I then cut some 20mm pieces with a chamfer on one of the sides of the wooden dowel. I then superglue the PVC pipe 5mm over the dowel. After a little bit of accelerator, I can also add a line of glue on the other end of the PVC pipe to add this 3mm wide strip of 2mm craft foam. Once cut to size, this will then serve as a decorative edge on the spotlight and serve as the place to glue its 4 fins. But first, I have to glue the ends of some popsicle sticks as the start of the frame that holds up the spotlight. These get attached at about a 45-degree angle, although to be honest I just used this resin 3D printed version that I got straight from the in-game model as our official reference. Now that we have a popsicle stick with a flat end ray, I can use this to make the bottom of the frame of the spotlights. By adding a little bit of glue to both bottoms and then pressing it onto the popsicle stick, then I just need to add a bit of accelerator and I'm good to snip off the rest of the stick. And with the leftover parts of that stick, I can then divide this into 4 more 20mm wide pieces to make for the aforementioned fins. Then, by stacking 3 sticks on top of each other, I'm able to angle the fins onto the edge of the foam board ring. So, with a drop of glue and accelerator, I can attach the fins to both sides of the ring. And since I now can't really use the stack anymore, I luckily have it to where the fins can now hold up the spotlights themselves as I add the rest of the fins onto the craft foam. Then it was time to make the speakers for the stage. For these I was also able to use the earlier mentioned model and put this through Peppercura to make for a paper pattern that I could then trace onto some foam board. Then I cut this out with some 45-degree edges to make for some nice sharp edges once I have the box fully glued up. I especially like the little cuts that I made onto the front face to make it curve to the rounding on the sides. Then I get this one combined with another speaker on top with a little spacer of 3mm to be able to center the 2 different widths. With about a 20-degree angle where they attach. I then support this with a bit more hot glue from the back. Once these have then solidified, I've already got some pieces of felt to make for the filter of the speakers. So with a little bit of Mod Podge, I glue them onto both front faces. Another accessory I really wanted to add that's not specifically from the game, but it might as well be, is this forklift pallet. Using some of the leftover pieces of the 9mm square dowel from the previous episode, I cut them into some 10cm long pieces and attached them with these 12cm long popsicle sticks. Using the thickness of one of these sticks to make for the space in between the planks, I then repeat this over the rest of the dowels. I was debating on adding a little light varnish over the wood, but I felt that this natural, cheap-ish look of the wood was already good enough to represent how these forklift pallets look IRL and thus in-game. Another accessory that's not officially in the game, but might as well be, is this spool of wire. This I'd quickly made with a wooden spool that is officially made for thread, and I then used the same technique of the popsicle sticks for the little stand that we'd also used on the spotlights. Then a bit of copper coated aluminium wire will make for the cord on the spool. This I wrap onto the spool and glue it in place with a drop of super glue. Now with the wire added, I can glue the bottom in place to finish up the spool. And then finally I leave a little bit more wire to spread around on the final diorama. Next up is the big screen that will be hung behind Deep Cut. For this I got another set of laser cut 4mm plywood that was made for the frame of the screen. The contour of this then gets attached to a piece of cardstock that then gets cut to size. And the inside wasn't thrown away because this was then used on the back to thicken up the screen. And some extra details on the back. I'd also attached the spotlights that we had just finished. After which I hand painted the wooden pieces with some acrylic black paint to cover up the wood grain, and with a little bit of sanding once that had dried, I spray painted the whole thing black. I got this in-game photo of Deep Cut performing on the stage printed on some photo paper. I also added this RGB lights filter on top to add to the screen effect. This now gets glued to the front of the screen with another layer of Mod Podge. Sadly, as I was grabbing the photo, my storage ran out. But at least now you can see how it's looking once it's all applied. Including this extra layer of 2mm acrylic on top that makes for a nice reflective finish as the glass would do on a real TV screen. Now, to finish off the screen, I used these silica molds for spheres that most of you should be really familiar with if you've watched our King Salmonid series. Instead of the little ones, I used the biggest one where I'd already marked out a diameter of 20mm with a permanent marker. Instead of filling it all the way to the top, I only filled it up to the line to make for a very smooth 20mm wide lens for the spotlights. Now all that was left is to add a little bit more hot glue to the edge of the spotlights to be able to attach this lens. Because this hot glue gets more cloudy as it solidifies, I'm able to use this to clean up the front of the spotlights and also use it to diffuse the light of the LED in the back at the same time. And now time for the other main part of the Day 2 diorama, the Sundial. You know, the Sundial. The big golden circle with all of the sun rays coming out at the back of the stage. You know, the big circle that we made from some more 6mm plywood, where those sun rays then get attached with a little bit of hot glue, made from some 6mm acrylic that we cut out to be pieces of 10mm wide. The one where I then added the hour faces, made from some stacked profiles of plywood. Yeah, you know, the one that needed to be coated with some black acrylic to hide the wood grain before it could be spray painted with a glossy black and then a layer of chrome gold.
I love gold!
Where I did specifically leave the ends of the sun rays clean of paint for a later step. You know, the Sundial! Okay. Enough of that bit. Since we are already outside and the asphalt texture is also dry, I can start to paint the base of the diorama with a matte black spray paint. Once this had dried, I also dry brushed on a few layers of some different grays onto the asphalt. And I also made the road markings with some more acrylic paints, with about 3 layers of white and about 10 layers of yellow. Yeah, I know. At least the dry brushing of the metallics on the girders went a lot smoother. And applying these lines onto the road was also pretty fun with this white chalk pencil. The only stressful part was that now I needed to apply these very thin lines of black paint over all of the white ones. But making the little thicker parts where the lines cross did end up giving us a very fun and very interesting texture. The tile texture going towards Atlantis was also really fun to apply with these little square pieces of masking tape and the 3 shades of grey. Now with all of the painting done for the base diorama, it was time to add the big screen to the girders. After having measured out the dimensions on my reference sheet, I knew how big I needed to make the 4 little supports that I'd added to the girders. Now all that was left to do was to apply a little drop of super glue to the 4 supports and then press the screen against it. And after I had cured just enough to be able to leave it hanging for just a sec, I was able to grab my accelerator to make sure that the glue was well set. Now came one of those parts of this project where it seems doable until you actually start to make them. Because at first, 24 of these transparent 3D printed lanterns did not seem too bad, until I realized that I could only add 5 of these per print cycle, and after printing I saw that a whole bunch of the supports were just about impossible to remove before curing. So a lot of sanding was needed. Like, so much sanding that I specifically made a sanding chamber to not get the resin dust throughout my workshop. At least it did give us a cool light show as soon as we had cleaned the prints with some isopropyl alcohol and cured them in the UV chamber, since there was still a little bit of alcohol in the lanterns that was evaporating very quickly thanks to the warm, just UV cured prints. Just please, don't try this at home, it's just for show. Once all 24 were printed, cured and sanded, I could apply a coat of Gryph-hound orange contrast paint from Citadel Paints through the airbrush to give them all their respective orange color, with a little bit of brown shading with some Gilliman flesh. Now all that was left was to apply a coat of black on the bottom and the top, and some leather brown on the slats. With them painted, I now needed to weave through the lines of LEDs that I prepared beforehand. Soldering up the LEDs was quite a challenge, since I have a power supply of 12 volts and some 2 volt LEDs for the lanterns. This meant that I needed to wire 6 of them in series to get the right amount of volts. Problem is that I have the lanterns hanging in series of 3, 4 and 5 lanterns long. So to solve this, I had to make a full line for the 3 and 5 series of lanterns, but for the 4 long lanterns, I divided this into a line of 3 and connected this back to the other 3, making their line 6 long. And finally, the single leftover lantern got connected all the way back to the other 5, also making this 6 long. And if you got confused by just that explanation, just imagine what we went through, as we also needed to take into account the polarities and the wiring, etc. Safe to say, it was quite a hat turner. At least on a bit of an easier note, the same orange transparent paint of the lanterns was also used for these resin 3D printed deep cut logos. And yes, I know they're originally supposed to be more of a yellowish gold color, however the reference that I used did not show that well enough for me to notice. And also, I put some white LEDs behind them, instead of the yellow ones that I was planning, and that, combined with the orange paint, does average it out to be really accurate to the reference sheet. But nothing I can do about it now, since we'd already applied some superglue to the hour faces and then a sprit of accelerator on the back of the logos. Once all 12 were installed, it was time to add the sundial to the back of the girders. Luckily for me, I'd already prepared this with some pre-drilled holes on both the girders and the supports on the sundial. Now, all that was left to do was to tighten the screws that will hold up the dial. Although I say this as if this was easy, but thanks to me forgetting about the screen in front, I did not have clear access to the screws anymore. So now, I had to use just the head of the wrench to tighten the screws with only my fingers. Yeah, that was not my brightest moment. Now, to make sure that these will last throughout the day, I glued these power plugs to the back of the diorama. This is where the adapters will be plugged in to power the LEDs, instead of all of these battery holders that I'd used on my previous dioramas, because I also don't think there are even battery holders that can get up to 12 volts. What would that be, like 8 AA batteries? We attach 2 because not only do we have the LED diodes, but we also have these LED strips. I had to cut these to lengths to match the 5 different lengths on the sun rays on the dial. Now I needed to add a line of hot glue to attach the strips, LEDs first, to the clear parts of the rays. This is also why I wanted to keep the ends of the rays paint free. Before we attach these all around the dial, I wanted to take a short break from all of these electronics before the final push of the project. So instead, I got to finish these fences that I'd prepped beforehand. These are made from some thick metal wire that I'd made into a 10 by 5 cm square with an open bottom and curved in both corners. These I then filled with some slats from some 3D printer filaments, and then I finished these with a 1 cm long piece of 3 mm thick bamboo skewer, with some 5 mm long pieces of 6 mm wooden dowels with one side chamfered. These I then spray painted with the standard glossy black for metallics and then some chrome silver. Now I apply these craft paper warning stripes in different patterns over the 6 fences. These stripes are luckily nothing special, just making use of some yellow paper as a base and having their stripes applied with a black marker. Then, after scraping off a little bit of paint for better adhesion, I then superglue these to the fences. And yes, I did get all of my fingers covered in superglue because of this. Now we can place these all around the Splatfest floats we made in the first part, with one fence on the back, one on each side of the float, and 3 of them in the front. And some of you might have already noticed it, but we got one more amiibo holder to place in the front of the diorama. But for who can it be? Place your bets down in the comments. But at last, it's time to get back to the LEDs, with our first task being to hang up the lanterns in the sundial. Fortunately for me, I wired the LEDs so that I could use the wires to hang them in the sundial without extra support. And I would have immediately regretted this, because sadly this is not so fortunate in the end. because this made it that a lot of the wires got damaged because of all of the twisting we did in the wires. So in the end, I had to take this entire section of lanterns apart again and rewire all of the LEDs back in place with a new support system using some 6mm dowels to let the lanterns hang from. This way there was a lot less stress on the wires, and it should hopefully make it so that the wires work properly this time. Spoiler alert, it did, luckily, because instead we would have them flashing on and off, as you could see with these lights on Koizuna. But I only noticed this as I tried to power the LEDs for the first time. So at this point I'm still in ignorant bliss as I continue to work on the LED strips. Adding the power, signal and ground wires to all of the strips. All of these I then connected to one central power and ground wire. A similar process was also used for the signal wires, but instead of one central wire, I had a few wires for each of the 5 different lengths of LED strips, because these will then go through the girders to the Arduino that we placed underneath the diorama. It was a mess, but fortunately we were able to sort out a few of the wires. Now to clean up the backs of the LED strips that still have their protective covers and that sticky backing. For this I got an A2 sheet of black craft paper and applied some of the same chrome gold that I'd used for the dowel in the first place. Then I cut the paper into strips and folded them into these U profiles. Then I cut these to length. And using the sticking backing on the strips, I can attach each to their respective strip. I even use these to cover up the sides of the race, using some extra hot glue. Now all that was left was to add these small pieces of bright red craft paper as the logos on the speakers, with the icons and text painted on with some white miniature paint. Finally, I did get to turn around the diorama and even add the float. For this I had already pre-drilled some holes and screws into the diorama where I wanted to attach the floats. So it was only a matter of lining up the supports with the screws, carefully pulling the diorama off the table without having it tip over. Oh, I had that a few times, that was so scary. And finally screwing the floats in place. Now I have it all secured, but if I ever want to, I can still remove the floats. So with them screwed in place, I can also finally add the firecrackers to each of their spots. With 4 sets being divided to either side of the front of the floats, with one going on top of the supports and one being hung underneath the smaller stage, and 2 going on the 4 and 8 o'clock faces on the dowel, and the last and smallest one being hung precisely in the middle of the dowel. Now we just need to hang up the new lanterns and connect them to the rest of the electronics. And with a final update to the Arduino to control the LEDs from underneath the diorama, with that, we can finally announce that our Splatfest Float Diorama is now completely finished. Oh yeah, and did we mention that it also stores a Nintendo Switch dock? So you can store both your amiibos and your console. How cool is that? Hey Creagears, Roboy here, and we hope you enjoyed the completed Splatfest Float Diorama. I wonder how many of you guys already noticed the little hints that we gave towards our plan to store a Nintendo Switch dock within the diorama. I mean, there were some unexplained features that we added to the diorama, like this holder suddenly appearing in the back, or the raising up of the diorama. Although this was also to store the wires and house the Arduino, so I guess you could also chalk it up to that. But did you also see the Lazy Susan that I added to the bottom when we glued in the adapter plugs? I'm really proud of that one, since it uses a little short piece of wood to act as a brake. With it getting stuck in this 180-degree track, it makes it so the diorama can still turn around to give you access to the switch, but it forces you to turn it around the same way to make sure that the wires don't get tangled up underneath. Smart, right? But I think with that, we're going to call this project done, since I also have to go and repair our Ice Padre cosplay to take with us to Comic-Con Holland. So, if you're also going, please leave a comment down below. I would love to be able to see some of you guys, if you're also going to the event. But with that, that's going to be all from us for now. Keep those creative gears turning, and we will see you guys in the next video.